Hello and welcome. The day has gone, but the night has only begun. It's time to quiet the mind and soothe the soul. Let these peaceful images and the promise of renewal carry you into a deep and restful sleep. Breathe in and out. Let's begin. Section 1. The color of favor. The sun, a relentless bronze coin in the vast, pale sky, poured its heat upon the tents of Jacob. The air over the land of Canaan shimmered, heavy with the sense of dry earth, time, and the distant, musky odor of the flock. Inside his tent, the old man, Jacob, now called Israel by the voice of God, ran his gnarled fingers over the fabric. It was a riot of color, a masterpiece of craftsmanship that screamed of privilege in a world of simple, undyed wool. Deep crimson, like the blood of a fresh sacrifice, was woven with threads of royal purple, extracted from rare sea snails at great cost. Lines of pure white and midnight black created a pattern of stunning complexity. This was no mere garment. It was a declaration. It was a long, ornamented tunic, the kind worn by those who did no manual labor, its sleeves extending fully to the wrists. A sigh, weighted with a lifetime of love and sorrow, escaped his lips. His mind drifted to Rachel, her beauty etched into his soul as permanently as the laws of God. She was the wife of his heart, the one for whom he had labored 14 years, and each day had felt like a single moment for the love he bore her. Joseph was her firstborn son, the child of his old age, a living remnant of her light in the world. In Joseph's face, he saw Rachel's eyes, her smile, her spirit. The robe was an extension of that love, a tangible, undeniable symbol of a father's bleeding heart. He knew the other sons saw it. He saw the resentment simmering in their eyes when Joseph wore it, the way their greetings grew cold and formal. But the old man's grief and his fierce, preferential love blinded him to the danger festering in his own household. He could no more hide his favor for Joseph than he could command the sun to reverse its course. The robe was a banner of division, and he had just handed it to the boy, ensuring it would be flown before his brothers. The tent flap rustled, and the light shifted as Joseph entered. The boy's face, so painfully reminiscent of his mother's, was alight with a curious intensity. "Father," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, "I have had a dream." Jacob leaned forward, his weariness momentarily forgotten. In their world, dreams were not mere figments of sleep. They were windows to the divine, messages from the God who had wrestled with him at Peniel. "Speak, my son," he urged, his voice a low rumble. Joseph's eyes, bright and earnest, held no hint of guile, only a profound and unsettling certainty. "We were in the field, binding sheaves of grain, my brothers and I." He gestured vaguely, as if encompassing the absent men. "And behold, my sheaf rose and stood upright." He mimicked the action with his hand, his fingers rising steadily. "And your sheaves," he continued, his gaze locking with his father's, "gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." The words hung in the stifling air of the tent. Jacob stared at his son, a complex storm of emotions warring within him. There was paternal pride, a flicker of awe at the potential divine origin of the vision, but also a cold, sharp spike of dread. He saw the truth in Joseph's eyes. The boy believed it utterly. He was not boasting. He was reporting a celestial fact as he would report the weather. "Enough!" Jacob's voice was sharper than he intended, a reflexive act to cap a wellspring of trouble. "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" He used the word mother, though Rachel was dead, invoking the memory of his beloved to chastise the son who embodied her. It was a messy, painful rebuke, born of fear. He saw the confusion and a flicker of hurt in Joseph's eyes, but the boy's fundamental certainty remained unshaken. He had seen what he had seen. The seed was planted, not just in Joseph's heart, but in the fertile, bitter soil of his brother's resentment, and Jacob, with his gift of a robe and his fearful fascination with the dream, had watered it himself. Section 2. The Shepherd's Return. A cloud of dust, a brown smudge against the hazy horizon, announced their return long before the brothers themselves became visible. They came from the hills around Shechem, where they had been pasturing their father's flocks, a weary, sun-baked procession of men and beasts. Their clothes were simple, coarse wool, stained with dirt, sweat, and the grime of weeks spent under the open sky. Their hands were calloused, their faces hardened and leathered by wind and sun and the constant, gritty labor of a shepherd's life. They moved with the slow, deliberate gait of men whose bodies were their primary tools, their muscles aching with a fatigue that was as much a part of them as their own breath. First came Reuben, the firstborn, his shoulders broad but his eyes often clouded with a deep, lingering shame and a failure to live up to the birthright he had squandered. Then Simeon and Levi, a pair bound by a ferocious, impulsive temper that had once laid the city of Shechem to waste in a bloody act of vengeance, their loyalty to each other a fortress against a world they believed was arrayed against them. Then Judah, with a pragmatic, sometimes cunning mind that sought the easiest, most profitable path, his ambitions quieter but no less potent than those of his more volatile siblings. And the others followed: Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, each carrying the invisible, festering scars of living perpetually in the shadow of their father's profound and public partiality. As they drew nearer to the cluster of tents that formed their home, their chatter, the rough, easy banter of men who shared a common burden, died down. Their eyes, squinted against the low-angled glare of the sun, lifted and focused as one on a single figure standing on a small, rocky rise near their father's grand tent. Joseph. He stood watching them, not with the joyful, eager welcome of a little brother, but with a quiet, observant stillness that felt, to their raw nerves, like judgment. And he was wearing it, the robe, the long, colorful, utterly impractical robe. It flowed around his slender frame, pristine and vibrant, a shocking visual insult in their world of dust and monochrome toil. The rich crimson and royal purple seemed to actively mock their own grimy, practical, undyed attire. He had not been with them in the fields. He had not borne the brutal midday heat or chased after straying lambs through thorny thickets. He had not faced the silent, hostile glances of the men of Shechem, who had not forgotten the swordwork of Simeon and Levi. He had remained here, in the relative comfort and safety of the camp, adorned in their father's favor like a queen adorned with jewels. No words were spoken, but a current of pure, undiluted hatred passed between the brothers, a silent communication more eloquent than any speech. It was in the clenched jaw of Simeon, the averted, guilt-ridden gaze of Reuben, the cold, flat, calculating stare of Judah. The robe was a flag of conquest planted on what they felt was their own soil, and Joseph was the unwitting, or perhaps in their minds not entirely unwitting, standard-bearer. "Look," Levi muttered, his voice a low growl. The dreamer deigns to observe the workers. A few of the others spat on the ground, a crude gesture of contempt. They trudged past him, their shoulders deliberately brushing against each other, creating a wall of solidarity that excluded him completely. Joseph, for his part, simply watched them go, his expression unreadable, a solitary figure in a tapestry of brilliant, divisive color, the weight of his dreams a shield against their silent scorn. He did not understand the depth of their hatred, for he was too young, too sure of his own specialness, to comprehend how love for one could feel like a theft from another. The stage was set, the players in position, and the air was thick with a promise of violence that had not yet found its voice. Section 3. The Whisper of Dreams and the Gathering Storm. That evening, as the vast Canaanite sky deepened from fiery orange to a soft, bruised purple, the family gathered for their meal. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. They sat in a loose circle around the central fire, the flames casting dancing, distorted shadows on their faces. The brothers ate in a sullen, heavy silence, their eyes fixed on their wooden bowls, avoiding both their father, who sat at the head, and Joseph, who sat close to Jacob's side. The old man, seemingly oblivious to the tempest he had nurtured or perhaps willfully ignoring its gathering force, doted on Joseph, ensuring his portion of stew had the choicest piece of lamb, his piece of bread the most well-baked section from the clay oven. The injustice of it was a sour taste in every mouth, more potent than the food itself. It was in this charged atmosphere, as the stars began to prick the velvet darkness, that Joseph chose to speak again. His voice, still holding the clear, unwavering tone of youth, cut through the silence like a knife. "Father," he began, then, with a boldness that bordered on folly, he turned his gaze to include his brothers. "Brothers, listen to this dream I had." All movement ceased. Spoons halted halfway to mouths. Eyes, hard and glinting in the firelight, lifted from bowls and narrowed upon him. The silence became a physical presence, pressing in on them all. "We were out in the field," Joseph continued, his voice earnest, almost excited, with no trace of intended malice, yet utterly devoid of the tact that might have softened the blow. "Binding sheaves of grain. Suddenly, my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." He made a small, illustrative gesture with his hand, his sheaf rising, their sheaves bending in submission. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the angry crackle and pop of the fire. It was as if he had thrown a stone into a still pond, and instead of ripples, the water had turned instantly to ice. Then, a low, dangerous grumble rose from the direction of Simeon and Levi. Simeon placed his bowl down with a deliberate slowness that was more threatening than a sudden movement. "Oh," he sneered, the word dripping with a venom that could poison the ground. "So you are to reign over us?" He leaned forward, the firelight carving harsh lines into his face. "You think you will have dominion over us, little brother? You, who has never spent a full season in the fields. You, who hides behind our father's robe." Levi, his twin in spirit, spat into the fire, the sizzle a punctuation of disgust. "What kind of dream is that?" he snarled. "The kind of proud, spoiled heart dreams." The other brothers joined in, their voices a rising chorus of scorn, disbelief, and long-suppressed rage. Judah watched, his expression more thoughtful, but his eyes were cold. Yet, beneath the hot anger, a cold, sharp sliver of fear lodged itself in their hearts. In their world, dreams were not mere fantasy. They were messages, portents of things to come, whispers from the God of their father, the God who had renamed him Israel. The sheer, audacious clarity of Joseph's dream, its specific and humiliating imagery, struck a chord of primal terror. What if it was true? What if this boy, this favorite, was truly marked for a destiny that placed them all beneath his heel? The combination of this fear and their seething resentment created a toxic brew. They could not speak to him civilly after that. Every glance, every shared chore, was laden with the unspoken words of the dream. Joseph, isolated in his certainty, became a walking prophecy, a living reminder of a future they were determined to prevent. The peace of the household shattered, not with a bang, but with the quiet, relentless whisper of dreams, a whisper that would soon crescendo into a scream of betrayal in the lonely hills of Dothan. Section 4. The Search and the Conspiracy. Weeks bled into one another, the tension in Jacob's household thickening into a constant, oppressive presence. Joseph, seemingly insulated by his divine dreams and his father's favor, moved through his days with a quiet purpose that grated on his brothers more than any open arrogance could have. The memory of the sheaves bowing festered in their minds, a psychic wound salted daily by the sight of that cursed robe. Then, a new development arose. The brothers had taken the flocks north, to the richer pastures of Shechem, a place forever stained by their own violence. Jacob, feeling a familiar, low thrum of anxiety, summoned Joseph. "Your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem," the old man said, his voice laced with a worry he could not fully articulate. "I need you to go to them, see if all is well with them and the flocks, and bring back word to me." It was a simple, practical request, but it carried the weight of a father's love and fear. For Joseph, it was a mission, a chance to step beyond the camp and into the world of his brothers, perhaps even to bridge the chasm between them. "I am ready, Father," he said, his expression earnest. He set off alone, the vibrant robe a beacon of color against the muted greens and browns of the countryside. The journey was long, and when he arrived at the fields of Shechem, he found them empty. He wandered, confused, until a local man, recognizing the family resemblance or perhaps the distinctive garment, pointed him north. "They have moved on from here," the man said. "I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph turned his steps toward Dothan, a solitary figure pursuing a destiny he could not yet comprehend. Meanwhile, in the rolling hills of Dothan, his brothers saw him from a distance. The landscape was open, and the approach of a single, colorfully clad figure was unmistakable. "Look," one of them said, his voice flat and cold. "Here comes that dreamer." A silent, electric current passed between them. The isolation of the place, the weight of their shared resentment, and the sudden, perfect opportunity coalesced into a single, dark purpose. They had joked in bitter whispers about silencing him, but now the idea took on a concrete, terrifying form. As Joseph drew nearer, unaware of the abyss he was walking toward, they gathered in a tight, conspiratorial circle. "Come now," said the voice of one, laced with a deadly seriousness that brooked no argument. "Let us kill him and throw him into one of these pits." The words hung in the air, stark and brutal. "We can say that a ferocious animal devoured him." The speaker's eyes were hard. "Then we shall see what becomes of his dreams." It was the logical, final solution to the problem of Joseph. To erase him, to reduce the divine prophecy to a lie told to a grieving father, and to reclaim their world from the shadow of his favor. The conspiracy was born not in a shout, but in a low, determined murmur against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the hills. Section 5. The Pit and the Price of Silver. The air in Dothan grew thick and heavy, charged with a malevolent energy that seemed to still the very insects. Joseph, finally reaching his brothers, offered a tentative smile, a greeting dying on his lips as he took in their expressions. There was no welcome here, only a cold, unified hatred that struck him with physical force. Before he could speak, they were upon him. Rough hands, calloused from years of labor that he had been spared, seized him. He cried out, a single, sharp exclamation of shock and fear that was swallowed by the vastness of the hills. They tore the magnificent robe from his body, the fabric ripping in their frantic haste, the vibrant colors of final, mocking flash before it was wadded into a dirty bundle and discarded. The symbol of his father's love was now a trophy of their hatred. They dragged him, struggling and pleading, toward a dry, rocky cistern, a deep pit carved into the earth to collect winter rains but now holding only dust and shadows. They paid no heed to his cries, his questions, his desperate appeals to their shared blood. In their eyes, he was no longer their brother. He was the dream, the favorite, the problem to be solved. With a final, brutal heave, they cast him down into the darkness. The fall was short but jarring, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He landed in a heap on the cold, stone floor, looking up at the circle of faces silhouetted against the bright sky, a circle that was now his entire world. The brothers, their immediate task done, sat down to eat. The casual normality of the act was more terrifying than the violence. As they passed bread and shared a skin of wine, they could hear the faint, muffled sounds from the pit, not screams anymore, but a low, broken weeping. It was Reuben, the firstborn, whose conscience had been screaming louder than Joseph, who had initially argued against murder. Seeing the others resolve, he had proposed the pit, a temporary measure, a desperate play for time. "Let us not take his life," he had urged, his voice strained. Now, he sat apart, his food tasting like ash, his mind racing for a way to extract his brother and return him safely to their father. It was then that a new element entered the scene. A caravan appeared on the horizon, a slow-moving thread of commerce and opportunity. Judah, the pragmatist, watched it approach, and a different, less bloody solution presented itself. "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?" he asked the group, his tone cool and practical. "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." The idea was a release valve. It removed the guilt of murder while still achieving the primary goal. Joseph would be gone, forever. His dreams would die in the foreign slave pits of Egypt. They would be rid of him, and they would profit from their betrayal. It was a transaction. They agreed. They hauled Joseph, now silent and shivering, from the pit. For a brief moment, hope must have flickered in his heart, only to be extinguished as he was presented to the traders. 20 shekels of silver. That was the price. The coins changed hands, a cold, metallic clink that sealed his fate. They watched as the Ishmaelites led him away, a small, defeated figure disappearing into the dust of the trade route, headed south toward a future of unimaginable servitude. The brothers were left with the silence, the 20 pieces of silver, and the blood-stained robe. Section 6. The lie woven and the grief unleashed. The brothers stood in a silent, hollow circle long after the dust from the Ishmaelite caravan had settled on the horizon. The deed was done. The silver, 20 pieces, felt heavy and cold in a pouch at Judah's belt, a weight far exceeding its physical mass. The initial, feverish energy of their conspiracy had evaporated, leaving behind a grim, ashen reality. They had sold their brother. The word, once an abstract solution, was now a concrete, monstrous fact that echoed in the quiet of the Dothan Hills. It was Reuben who had planned a secret rescue, who now felt the full, crashing wave of their collective failure. He had returned to the camp later than the others, his mind having concocted a plan to retrieve Joseph under cover of darkness. He went to the pit, his heart pounding with a desperate hope, and peered in. It was empty. A cold dread seized him. "The boy is gone," he cried out, his voice raw with a genuine anguish that startled the others. "And where shall I go?" His grief was not just for Joseph, but for his own shattered standing, his failure as the firstborn to protect the youngest. The others watched him, their own guilt mirrored in his distress. Now, the second part of their grim task remained, the lie for their father. They took the robe, the very garment that had started it all, and deliberated. They could not present it clean. That would raise questions. So they found a young goat, and with a grim, practical efficiency, they slaughtered it. They dipped the ornate tunic in the pooling blood, the vibrant crimson threads darkening, the purple and white stained with a shocking, garish red. They made sure the evidence was unmistakable, a tableau of tragedy. They carried the robe back to Hebron, their steps heavy, their faces practiced into masks of somber concern. They presented the bloodied cloth to their father. "We found this," one of them said, their voices carefully modulated to convey shock and sorrow. "Please examine it. Is it your son's robe or not?" The moment stretched, a lifetime passing in the space between the question and the answer. Jacob took the fabric. His hands, old and veined, trembled as they traced the familiar pattern now defiled by the dark, crusted blood. He brought it to his face, and the metallic, coppery scent filled his nostrils, a confirmation of his worst fears. A wail tore from him, a sound of such profound, soul-shattering agony that it silenced the entire camp. It was the cry of a man who had already lost the love of his life and now believed he had lost her son, the living reminder of her. "It is my son's robe," he sobbed, his body folding in on itself. "A ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." He rent his own clothes, the sound of tearing fabric a feeble echo of the rending of his heart. He put on sackcloth, the rough, abrasive material a physical manifestation of his internal desolation. He refused all comfort from his sons, from his other wives. "I will go down to the grave mourning my son," he declared, his voice hollowed out by grief. And so he did, for weeks, then months, a perpetual shadow of a man, his life defined by an absence. The brothers watched, their silver a secret curse, their victory over the dreamer tasting like dust and ashes. They had gotten what they wanted, but the house of Jacob was now a tomb, and they were its silent, guilt-ridden keepers. Section 7. The Descent into Egypt and the First Test. The journey south was a brutal descent in every sense. For Joseph, the world had shrunk to the swaying back of a camel, the jingle of harnesses, and the coarse, unfeeling banter of the Ishmaelite traders. The familiar hills of Canaan gave way to the arid vastness of the wilderness. And then, as they crossed the border, to the shocking, fecund green of the Nile Delta. Egypt was a sensory assault. The air was different, humid and thick with the smell of the great river, of papyrus, and of a teeming, polytheistic humanity. The sights were alien, colossal stone temples reaching for the sky, bustling cities where people dressed in fine linen, and the sheer, organized scale of a civilization that made his nomadic upbringing seem primitive. He was a commodity, a piece of property. The traders, seeing his youth and pleasing appearance, knew he would fetch a higher price in the sophisticated capital markets than in some border outpost. They took him to Memphis and then onward to Thebes, but ultimately, the heart of the slave trade beat strongest in the capital itself. He was paraded in a bustling market, his worth assessed with the same dispassionate eyes used for livestock. It was there that he was purchased by a man whose name would become the framework of his new life. Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, the captain of the royal guard. Joseph was led from the public squalor of the market into the ordered, opulent, and intimidating world of Potiphar's estate. The house was a small palace, with painted walls, tiled floors, and a hierarchy as complex and rigid as any court. He was just another slave, a Hebrew boy in a land of Egyptians. His dreams, his father's favor, his brother's betrayal, all of it must have felt like a half-remembered fantasy from another lifetime. The first test was simple survival, understanding the unspoken rules, the chain of command, the dangers that lurked in a wrong glance or a misspoken word. But the biblical account offers a single, powerful line that illuminates this period. The Lord was with Joseph. This was not a presence that spared him hardship or erased his slave status. It was a presence that granted him a profound resilience, a sharpness of mind, and a quality of character that could not be hidden. He worked, not with the sullen resentment of a captive, but with a quiet diligence and an innate trustworthiness. He was competent. He was reliable. He did not see his work as servitude to Potiphar, but as a duty performed under the watchful eye of his God. This did not go unnoticed. The chief steward, the man who managed Potiphar's household, saw that this young foreigner was different. Tasks given to Joseph were completed efficiently and without need for supervision. He did not pilfer or gossip. Slowly, incrementally, small responsibilities were entrusted to him. Joseph did not merely complete them. He excelled. The Lord was with him, and he prospered in the hand of the Egyptian. It was the first, small green shoot of hope breaking through the hard-packed soil of his despair, a quiet fulfillment of a different kind of dream, not of sheaves bowing, but of a character being forged in the furnace of affliction. Section 8. The Rise and the Shadow in the House. Joseph's rise within Potiphar's household was as steady and undeniable as the rising of the Nile. The presence of the Lord that was with him was not a mystical cloud but a tangible force manifested in his unparalleled competence and integrity. The chief steward, initially cautious, became his advocate, reporting to Potiphar on the remarkable Hebrew slave who seemed to have a Midas touch. Potiphar, a busy man of court and military, was a pragmatist. He cared for results, and the results in his household since Joseph's arrival were undeniable. Provisions were managed with unprecedented efficiency. Waste was minimized. The complex logistics of running a vast estate, which included other slaves, servants, and even small-scale agriculture, seemed to flow with a new, seamless harmony. Potiphar conducted his own investigation, observing Joseph not as a master observes a slave, but as a strategist observes a valuable asset. He saw the intelligence in the young man's eyes, the quiet authority with which he directed others, and the palpable sense of peace that surrounded him, a peace that seemed impervious to the petty intrigues of the household. The decision, when it came, was a monumental leap of faith in a society bound by caste and tradition. Potiphar appointed Joseph as the overseer of his entire household. He placed everything he owned under Joseph's authority, from the silver cups at his table to the deeds for his fields, from the other servants to the management of his wealth. Joseph became the de facto master of the domain. The text states a profound truth. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing was not just on Joseph, but on Potiphar himself. His flocks multiplied, his crops were abundant, his wealth increased. Potiphar, recognizing the source of this prosperity, gave Joseph ever more freedom. He knew nothing of the affairs of his house now except the food he ate. He trusted Joseph implicitly. For years, this was Joseph's life. He was a slave in name, but in reality, he was the chief executive of a great estate, a respected and powerful figure within those walls. He had exchanged the colorful robe of his father for the invisible, but far more substantial, robe of responsibility and trust. He had mastered his circumstances, but a new shadow was growing within the sun-drenched house of Potiphar. It was the gaze of Potiphar's wife. She had watched this rise, this transformation of a foreign slave into a man of stature and handsome form. She saw his strength, his confidence, the light in his eyes that was so different from the obsequious servants or the boastful nobles she knew. A dangerous fascination took root, blossoming into a brazen and relentless desire. She began with suggestive glances, then with carefully chosen words of flattery when they passed in the courtyard. Joseph, acutely aware of the precariousness of his position and, more importantly, bound by a loyalty to his master and a covenant with his God, met her advances with a firm, unwavering politeness. He did not encourage her, but he could not openly rebuke the mistress of the house. The tension simmered, a silent, volatile current running beneath the orderly surface of the prosperous household, waiting for a single, unguarded moment to erupt. Section 9. The tempter's gaze and the unshakable resolve. The air in Potiphar's house, once a haven of orderly prosperity, grew thick with an unspoken tension. Potiphar's wife, a woman accustomed to having her desires met with immediacy, found her every thought consumed by the Hebrew overseer. Joseph's very presence, his quiet efficiency, and the aura of disciplined strength that surrounded him became an obsession. She began to orchestrate encounters, finding reasons to be in the parts of the house where he conducted his business. Her compliments grew less veiled, her touches, when they happened accidentally on purpose, lingered a moment too long. Joseph, for his part, navigated this treacherous terrain with immense care. He was polite, respectful, but always distant, his demeanor a wall of professional duty. He understood the danger with a clarity that chilled him to the bone. To succumb would be a betrayal of Potiphar's profound trust, a trust that had lifted him from the common quarters of slaves to a position of unparalleled authority. But more than that, it would be a sin, a fundamental breach of the covenant with his God. He carried the laws of his fathers in his heart, even in this land of many gods. One day, she cornered him in a quiet anteroom, away from the main bustle of the household. "Come to bed with me," she said, her voice a low, insistent whisper, her hand closing around his wrist. The directness of the demand stripped away all pretense. Joseph recoiled, pulling his hand away as if burned. "With me in charge," he said, his voice low but firm. "My master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife." He laid out the logic of his loyalty, the sheer weight of the trust placed in him. But then he went further, anchoring his refusal not just in earthly duty, but in divine law. "How then could I do such a wicked thing?" he continued, his gaze steady and unyielding. "And sin against God?" The words hung in the air, a declaration of a higher allegiance that she could not comprehend. She stared at him, her fascination curdling into something darker, a mixture of humiliation and fury. He had not just rejected her, he had judged her. He had placed his obscure, unseen God above her position, above her desire. She said nothing, releasing his wrist and turning away, her posture rigid with offended pride. Joseph left the room, his heart pounding, knowing the fragile piece of his life had just been shattered. The refusal was absolute, but the tempter's gaze had not wavered. It had only sharpened, transforming from desire into a vow of vengeance. Section 10. The trap sprung and the fall from grace. In the days that followed, Joseph adopted a new strategy: utter avoidance. He ensured he was never alone in the house with her. If she entered a room, he found a reason to leave. He delegated tasks that would require direct interaction with her to other, trusted servants. He became a ghost in the house he managed, his presence felt only through the flawless execution of his duties. This blatant evasion only fed the woman's smoldering rage. The humiliation of his rejection festered, and the object of her desire was now a constant, silent rebuke. She would have him, one way or another. If she could not have him in her bed, she would have him destroyed. The opportunity came on a day when all the male servants were away on business in the city. The house was quiet, almost empty. She knew Joseph would be inside, attending to the accounts in the main hall. She waited, her heart a drumbeat of malicious intent. She approached him, and this time, there was no subtlety, no whispered persuasion. She went directly to him and caught his cloak in her fist. "Come to bed with me," she demanded, her voice loud in the silent hall. Panic and resolve warred within Joseph. He could not reason with her. He could not stay. To be found there, with her clutching his garment, was a sentence already passed. In a moment of pure survival instinct, he wrenched himself free. The fine linen of his cloak, a symbol of his station in Potiphar's house, tore in her grasp. He fled, leaving her standing there, holding the ripped fabric, the evidence of her lie now physically in her hands. She stood for a moment, the fury crystallizing into a cold, calculated plan. She began to scream. She screamed for the few remaining household servants, her cries those of a woman wronged. When they came rushing, their faces alarmed, she held up the torn cloak. She had her story ready, her performance perfected. "See," she wept, her voice trembling with feigned terror and outrage. "This Hebrew slave you brought among us came in here to force himself on me. But when I screamed for help, he fled, leaving his cloak behind." She waited until Potiphar returned home. Then she delivered the performance again, this time for her husband, holding the cloak as her prime exhibit. "This is how your slave treated me," she said, her eyes wide with manufactured trauma. Potiphar listened, his face a mask. He looked at the cloak, the symbol of the authority he had given Joseph, now a testament to an alleged, profound betrayal. He looked at his wife, the picture of outraged virtue. The evidence was damning. The accuser was his own wife. Joseph's character, his years of flawless service, his quiet faith, all of it meant nothing against the tearful accusation of an Egyptian noblewoman. When Joseph was brought before him, he said nothing in his own defense. What could he say? It was his word against hers, a slave against his master's wife. Potiphar's anger was swift and severe. The trust was broken. The blessing, it seemed, had ended. Joseph, who had risen so high from the depths of the pit, was cast down once more. Potiphar had him seized and thrown into the royal prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. The fall was absolute. The overseer of a great estate was now a common prisoner, his dreams buried deeper than ever beneath the cold, hard stone of a pharaoh's dungeon. Section 11. The dungeon and the familiar presence. The transition from Potiphar's opulent estate to the royal prison was a descent into another world, one of shadows, damp stone, and the collective despair of the king's forgotten enemies. The heavy door slammed shut behind Joseph with a finality that echoed the closing of his former life. The air was cold and stale, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, mildew, and hopelessness. He was stripped of his overseer's garments and given the rough, common tunic of a prisoner. Once again, he was reduced to nothing, his identity scrubbed away by the grim efficiency of the state's punishment. He was a Hebrew slave, now a convicted criminal in the eyes of Egyptian law, accused of a capital offense against a high-ranking official. If he had given in to despair, no one would have blamed him. The path from the pit in Dothan to this prison in Egypt seemed a cruel, downward spiral, a mockery of the grand dreams of his youth. Where was the bowing sheaf now? Where were the stars paying homage? They felt like the delusions of a foolish boy. Yet, in the oppressive darkness of the dungeon, a familiar truth asserted itself, a truth that had sustained him in Potiphar's house. The biblical narrative repeats its quiet, powerful refrain. But the Lord was with Joseph. The presence that had granted him favor and success in Potiphar's house did not abandon him at the prison gate. It manifested not in his release, but in his resilience. It was the strength to not let his spirit be broken, the capacity to find purpose even here. He did not sit in the corner, weeping over his fate. He observed. He listened. He used the same keen mind that had managed a vast estate to understand the social structure of the prison. He saw the warden, a man likely hardened by his grim profession. He saw the other prisoners, officials who had fallen from grace, men caught in political intrigues, common criminals. And Joseph, somehow, began to extend kindness. He listened to their stories. He offered a word of encouragement. The warden, a man who had seen every type of man pass through his gates, noticed this Hebrew prisoner. He wasn't sullen or rebellious. He was calm, competent, and strangely trustworthy. Just as Potiphar had seen a unique quality in him, So too did the chief jailer. Small tasks were given to Joseph. He performed them without complaint, with the same diligence he had applied to managing Potiphar's wealth. The warden saw that Joseph was not like the others. And once again, the text reveals the divine mechanism at work. The Lord was with Joseph. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. He became the overseer of the dungeon, just as he had been the overseer of the house. He was responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. The prison became his new domain, a kingdom of shadows, but a kingdom nonetheless. It was not the destiny he had dreamed of, but it was a purpose. He was walking, and not fainting, through the deepest valley of his life. Section 12. The cupbearer, the baker, and the gift unveiled. Time lost its meaning in the perpetual twilight of the prison. Joseph administered his grim kingdom with a quiet efficiency, his authority unquestioned by both the jailers and the prisoners. Then, 2 new inmates arrived, their status immediately marking them as different from the common criminals. They were high-ranking officials from Pharaoh's own court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. The text states that they had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. The nature of their offense was a mystery, but the consequence was their confinement in the royal prison, the very place where Joseph was. The captain of the guard, Potiphar himself, assigned them to Joseph's care. He attended them, a former slave and overseer now serving 2 fallen nobles. They remained in custody for some time, their futures hanging in a terrifying balance. Then, one morning, Joseph noticed a profound change in their demeanors. Both men looked agitated, their faces drawn with worry and confusion. "Why do you look so sad today?" Joseph asked them, his tone one of genuine concern. They looked at each other, then back at him. "We both had dreams," they replied, "but there is no one to interpret them." In that moment, something stirred in Joseph, a memory of another life, of sheaves and stars and a father's fearful rebuke. The gift, it seemed, had not been extinguished by the pit, the caravan, the slave market, or the prison. It had been buried, waiting. He looked at them, and with a calm that belied the significance of the moment, he said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." It was a profound statement of faith. He was not claiming the power for himself, but pointing to the source of all wisdom, the same God who was with him in the dungeon. The chief cupbearer went first, eager to unburden himself. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a vine before me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." The image was clear, vivid, tied directly to his former office. Joseph listened, and the interpretation came to him, not as a guess, but as a received certainty. "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer." It was wonderful, hopeful news. But then Joseph, perhaps feeling the first flicker of a personal hope in years, appended a personal plea. "But when all goes well with you, remember me. Show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." The baker, seeing the favorable interpretation, was now filled with anticipation. He quickly shared his dream. "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph's face grew solemn. The interpretation was stark and terrible. "This is what it means," he said gently but without softening the blow. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." The words fell like a death sentence. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, it happened exactly as Joseph had said. The cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was impaled. The gift had been proven true. a stark and undeniable link to the divine in the heart of the dungeon. But as the cupbearer returned to the splendor of the court, flushed with relief and gratitude, he forgot the Hebrew prisoner who had given him hope. Joseph was left in the silence, the miracle of his gift having changed nothing about his own circumstances. The wait continued. Section 13. The long silence and the forgetting. The restoration of the chief cupbearer created a brief, electric current of hope within the prison's stone walls. For a few days, Joseph moved through his duties with a renewed lightness, his ears straining for the sound of approaching guards, his name on their lips, summoned by a grateful Pharaoh. He replayed the moment in his mind, the clarity of the interpretations, the cupbearer's relieved face, the earnest promise he had extracted. Surely the man would remember. Surely this was the turning point, the divine hand finally pulling him from the abyss. The days turned into weeks. The prison routine reasserted itself. The same grim faces, the same damp air, the same clang of heavy doors. The cupbearer did not come. No summons arrived from the palace. The hope, so bright and fragile, began to dim, guttering like a candle in a draft. The silence from the outside world was a louder verdict than any judge's decree. He had been forgotten. The miracle he had performed, the undeniable evidence of God's favor in granting the interpretation, had resulted in precisely nothing for him. This was a new kind of test, perhaps more profound than the pit or Potiphar's wife. It was the test of faithful service in the face of divine delay. The promise was true, the gift was real, but the timing was God's alone. Joseph could have succumbed to bitterness. He could have decided his gift was a curse, that his integrity was a fool's game. He could have let the prison break him, becoming a sullen, hollowed-out shell like so many others. But the text does not say he despaired. It implies he endured. The Lord was with Joseph was a statement not of dramatic rescue, but of sustained character. He continued his work. He oversaw the prisoners. He administered the warden's affairs. He did his duty, day after silent day, with the same diligence he had shown when hope was fresh. 2 full years passed. The memory of the cupbearer's dream grew hazy, a story from another lifetime. Joseph was now a permanent fixture of the prison, its efficient, quiet manager. The dreams of his youth were not dead, but they were buried deep, fossilized under layers of disappointment and the relentless grind of time. He had learned to walk, and not faint, through the long, flat plain of obscurity. His strength renewed not for a sprint to freedom, but for the marathon of waiting. Section 14. The Pharaoh's disturbance and the remembered sin. In the sublime splendor of the royal palace, a different kind of darkness descended. Pharaoh, the god-king of Egypt, was troubled. He had dreams, not once, but twice in a single night, and their vivid, unsettling imagery clung to him upon waking. In the first dream, he stood by the Nile, and out of the river came 7 cows, sleek and fat, who grazed among the reeds. Then 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the river and stood beside them. To his horror, the gaunt, ugly cows devoured the 7 fat, sleek cows. He awoke, disturbed, but then fell asleep and dreamed again. This time, he saw a single stalk of grain with 7 heads, healthy and good. Then 7 other heads, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted after them. The thin heads swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. The symbolism was stark, a cycle of plenty consumed by blight. He awoke a second time, his heart pounding, the feeling of dread now a solid weight in his chest. This was no ordinary dream. This was a portent. The next morning, his spirit was agitated. He summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. He recounted the dreams in detail, his voice echoing in the grand hall. The assembled sages, men versed in sacred texts and occult arts, listened intently. They consulted their scrolls. They murmured amongst themselves, 但他们无法解释，他们无法提供解释，但他们无法解释，他们无法提供解释。But they could not interpret it. They could not provide an interpretation. The dreams defied their wisdom. A palpable anxiety began to spread through the court. The god-king was troubled, and his trouble meant the entire land was in peril. They could not soothe him. It was in this atmosphere of rising panic that a memory, long buried under the weight of courtly life and self-preservation, stirred in the mind of the chief cupbearer. He heard Pharaoh lamenting his helpless wise men, and the words of a Hebrew prisoner in a dark dungeon 2 years prior echoed as if shouted in the silent hall. The clarity of the interpretations, the precise fulfillment, it all came rushing back, and with it, a crushing wave of guilt. He had forgotten. He had enjoyed his restored life and forgotten the man to whom he owed it. He stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Today I am reminded of my shortcoming." He confessed to Pharaoh, his head bowed. He recounted the story of his and the baker's imprisonment, their shared sadness, and the young Hebrew slave who was there with them. "He interpreted our dreams for us," the cupbearer said, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. "And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled." The court fell silent. All eyes were on the cupbearer, then on Pharaoh, a Hebrew slave, in the royal prison, with the power to interpret dreams where Egypt's finest had failed. Pharaoh did not hesitate. The failure of his wise men was absolute. Any chance, however slim or unorthodox, was worth pursuing. The order was issued immediately. "Send for him," Pharaoh commanded, his voice ringing with imperial authority. The machinery of the palace sprang into action. The long silence was about to be broken. Section 15. The Summons and the Transformation. The arrival of the royal guards at the prison was an event of terrifying significance. Their armor gleamed in the dim light, a shocking intrusion of the outside world's power and pageantry. The warden, bowing low, led them directly to Joseph. For a heart-stopping moment, Joseph must have feared the worst. That Potiphar's wife had renewed her accusations, that his time had finally run out. But the guard's demeanor was not violent. It was urgent, respectful. "Come," one said. "Pharaoh has summoned you." The words were unbelievable. As he was rushed from the dungeon, the other prisoners watched in awe. He was taken not to an executioner, but to the palace quarters where he was hastily cleaned up. The grime of the prison was scrubbed from his skin. His hair was trimmed. They brought him new clothes, not the finery of an overseer, but clean, presentable garments suitable for standing before the God-King. The transformation was physical, but the greater change was internal. The years of waiting, of faithful service in obscurity, had forged a man of unshakable poise. He was no longer the boy boasting of dreams, nor the frightened slave fleeing temptation. He was a man who had been broken and remade in the dark, his character tempered like fine steel. He was led through corridors of breathtaking splendor, past murals of gods and conquests, into the throne room itself. There, seated in regal majesty, was Pharaoh holding the flail and crook, the living incarnation of Horus. The room was filled with courtiers, advisors, and the shamed wise men. All eyes were on the Hebrew prisoner. Pharaoh looked him over, seeing not a cowering slave, but a man who stood with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "I have had a dream," Pharaoh stated, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "And no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." This was the moment. This was the test of a lifetime. Joseph could have preened, could have hinted at his own ability. Instead, he did what he had done in the prison. He pointed away from himself. "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, his voice calm and clear. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. In one sentence, he deflected all potential glory and established the true source of his gift. He was merely a vessel. He stood before the most powerful man on earth not as a supplicant, but as an ambassador of a higher power. The stage was set not for Joseph the dreamer, but for Joseph the prophet. Section 16. The interpretation and the strategy. Pharaoh, intrigued and desperate for an answer, recounted his dreams. He described the 7 fat cows and the 7 gaunt cows, the 7 full heads of grain and the 7 blighted heads. The vivid, unsettling imagery filled the throne room. Joseph listened, his face a mask of intense concentration. When Pharaoh finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Joseph spoke, and his voice carried a divine authority that hushed the room. "Your dreams are one and the same," he began. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do." He then delivered the interpretation with stunning clarity. "The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine." He laid out the coming reality without flinching. 7 years of such great abundance that it would be unprecedented, followed by 7 years of such severe famine that the abundance would be forgotten and the land would be ravaged. "The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms," Joseph explained, "is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon." But Joseph did not stop at the prophecy of doom. The gift of interpretation was now coupled with a gift of administration, honed over years of managing a household and a prison. He saw the problem and, guided by the same divine wisdom, he saw the solution. He looked directly at Pharaoh, his gaze steady and confident. "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance." He laid out a detailed, practical economic plan. Store the surplus grain under royal authority during the good years, creating a central reserve to be used during the famine. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. It was a breathtaking performance. He had not only diagnosed the divine decree but had provided the human solution. He had moved from being an interpreter to a strategist, from a prophet to a prime minister in the space of a single speech. The court was stunned into silence. The wisdom of this Hebrew prisoner had just eclipsed the collective knowledge of all Egypt's sages. Section 17. The rise to vizier and the symbol of power. A profound silence held the throne room in its grip after Joseph finished speaking. The clarity of the interpretation, the terrifying scope of the prophecy, and the brilliant, practical solution had left the courtiers and wise men speechless. Pharaoh looked from his own advisors, who had offered nothing, to this Hebrew prisoner who had laid out a complete blueprint for national salvation. The divine favor upon Joseph was not just a claim. It was a palpable force in the room. Pharaoh turned to his officials, his decision made with a swiftness that brooked no dissent. "Can we find anyone like this man?" he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "One in whom is the spirit of the gods?" It was the highest possible endorsement. In recognizing the spirit of the gods within Joseph, Pharaoh was elevating him above all earthly rank and tradition. The solution was obvious. "Since God has made all this known to you," Pharaoh said to Joseph, "there is no one so discerning and wise as you." The pronouncement that followed was staggering. "You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." With those words, Joseph was elevated from a forgotten prisoner to the second most powerful man in the most powerful empire on earth. To formalize this unprecedented appointment, Pharaoh performed a series of symbolic acts. He took his own signet ring from his finger and slid it onto Joseph's hand. This ring was the instrument of state, its impression on a document making it the law of the land. Joseph now held the power to decree anything in Pharaoh's name. He then had Joseph dressed in robes of fine linen, a fabric so precious it was reserved for royalty and the highest priesthood. A gold chain was placed around his neck, another symbol of supreme authority. He had him ride in the chariot that served as his own second-in-commands. And as they rode through the streets of the capital, heralds cried out before him, "Make way," or "Abrek," a term of great respect, signaling that all were to kneel before this new vizier. Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, which likely meant "God speaks and he lives," a permanent testament to the source of his wisdom. He also gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of a high-ranking priest of On, solidifying his place in the Egyptian aristocracy. Joseph was 30 years old. 13 years had passed since he was sold into slavery by his brothers. The boy with dreams of stars bowing was now the man upon whom the fate of nations would rest. He had been prepared in the hidden places, the pit, the slave quarters, the prison, for this exact moment of global crisis. Section 18. The years of abundance and the granaries of Egypt. With the authority of Pharaoh's ring upon his finger, Joseph did not delay. The dreams were a prophecy, but the survival of Egypt was now a logistical challenge, and he was the master logistician. He embarked on a tour of the entire land, from the lush delta to the southern reaches, assessing its agricultural capacity. He appointed a network of commissioners, loyal and efficient men answerable directly to him, in every region. The decree went out. For the next 7 years, 1/5 of all the harvest was to be collected as a national tax and stored in royal granaries. The plan was executed with military precision, and just as Joseph had foretold, the earth responded with a fecundity that was almost frightening. The Nile flooded its banks with perfect generosity, depositing rich, black silt across the fields. The harvests were not just good, they were beyond measure. The wheat and barley grew so thick and tall that the stalks seemed to support one another. The yield was so abundant that it was like the sand of the sea, impossible to keep track of. Joseph's commissioners were everywhere, overseeing the collection. The grain was not left in open piles to rot or be plundered. Joseph, with the foresight honed by years of management, ordered the construction of granaries. These were not simple storage pits, but vast, fortified complexes in every major city. They were designed with ventilation to keep the grain dry, guarded by soldiers loyal to the vizier, and meticulously inventoried. Joseph himself traveled from city to city, inspecting the stores, ensuring there was no corruption, that the records were accurate. He saw the mountains of grain rising, the golden kernels a tangible bulwark against the coming darkness. The people, living in the midst of such plenty, grumbled at the high tax, but they complied, trusting in the strange wisdom of the vizier who had appeared so suddenly from obscurity. For 7 years, the work continued unabated. The granaries of Egypt swelled until they were full to bursting. The years of abundance ended, and just as Joseph had said, the 7 years of famine began. It started subtly, a lower Nile flood, a spring that was a little too hot, a harvest that was merely good instead of spectacular. But the next year, the river was miserly, and the sun became a brutal enemy, scorching the young shoots. The following years saw no relief. The famine struck not only Egypt but all the surrounding lands. The earth hardened, the skies withheld their rain, and hunger became a ghost that walked every street. But in Egypt, there was bread. When the people cried out to Pharaoh, he directed them to Joseph. "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you," was the royal command. And Joseph, the steward of the great salvation, opened the storehouses and began to sell grain to the Egyptians. The wisdom of the plan, born in a prison cell and executed with flawless discipline, now stood as the sole barrier between civilization and collapse. The name of Zaphenath-Paneah was on every lip, not as a foreigner, but as the savior of the land. Section 19. The first journey of the brothers. The famine, like a creeping plague, knew no borders. It gripped Canaan with the same iron fist as it did Egypt. In the tents of Jacob, the fear was palpable. The herds were thinning, the stored grain was nearly gone, and the specter of starvation loomed over the entire clan. The old man, whose grief for Joseph had become a permanent part of his identity, now faced the potential loss of his entire family. But a rumor, a whisper on the dry wind, reached them. "There is grain in Egypt," the stories said. People were traveling south, to the great kingdom on the Nile, and returning with life-saving provisions. Jacob gathered his sons, his face etched with new worry. "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" he asked them, his voice thin with strain. "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." And so, 10 of Joseph's brothers set out for Egypt, leaving the youngest, Benjamin, Rachel's only other son, behind with their father. Jacob, his heart still a raw wound from the loss of Joseph, could not bear the thought of any harm coming to Benjamin. "My son must not go down there with you," he insisted. "For his brother is dead and he is the only one left. If harm came to him on the journey you are taking, you would bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." The brothers joined the caravan of desperate souls heading toward the hope of food. They arrived in Egypt, overwhelmed by the scale of the cities and the rigid, hierarchical society. They learned that all grain sales were controlled by the vizier himself, the mighty Zaphenath-Paneah, and that an audience with him was required. They were ushered into his presence, and they bowed low, their faces to the ground, to petition the man who held the power of life and death. Joseph, seated in regal state, recognized his brothers instantly. The years had changed them, hardened them, but their faces were seared into his memory. They, however, saw only an Egyptian lord, dressed in fine linen, adorned with gold. His face perhaps darkened with kohl, speaking the language of the court through an interpreter. They did not recognize the boy they had thrown into the pit. A tumult of emotions, old hurt, rage, grief, and a strange, soaring sense of fulfillment surged within Joseph. The dream of the sheaves bowing down was being enacted before his very eyes. But he concealed his identity. He remembered their conspiracy. He spoke to them harshly through the interpreter. "Where do you come from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan to buy food," they replied, their posture still one of deep submission. Then Joseph, his mind working with a swift and complex strategy, accused them of being spies. "You have come to see the nakedness of the land," he declared. This was a capital offense. The brothers were terrified, their journey for salvation suddenly turning into a nightmare. They protested their innocence, explaining their family story. "We are 12 brothers, the sons of one man. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph, using their own words to test them and to orchestrate a reunion with his full brother, Benjamin, pressed his advantage. He declared that, to prove their honesty, one of them must remain in prison while the others returned to Canaan to fetch this youngest brother. He had Simeon taken and bound before their eyes. He then filled their sacks with grain, but secretly returned each man's payment of silver to the top of his sack. The brothers, their hearts heavy with a strange, unplaceable dread, began the journey home, the ghost of their past sin now walking silently beside them. Section 20. The Return and the Plea for Benjamin. The journey back to Canaan was haunted. The brothers were not just carrying grain. They were carrying a deep, unsettling fear. They had the food to save their families, but they had left Simeon in an Egyptian prison, and the vizier's demand for Benjamin hung over them like a death sentence. When they stopped for the night and one of them opened his sack to feed the donkeys, he found his silver, the full payment, gleaming back at him. His heart sank, and a cry of alarm brought the others. They all opened their sacks, and each one found his silver returned. A wave of terror swept through them. "What is this that God has done to us?" they whispered to one another, their faces pale. This was not a blessing. It felt like a trap, a divine retribution they could not understand. They arrived home and told their father Jacob everything that had happened. The harsh reception, the accusation of spying, the imprisonment of Simeon, and the impossible demand to bring Benjamin to Egypt. And then, as the final, crushing blow, they emptied their sacks, and each man's bundle of silver clattered to the ground. The sight of the money, a seeming theft that would brand them as criminals, filled Jacob with a fresh, overwhelming despair. "You have deprived me of my children," he lamented, his voice breaking. "Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Reuben, in a desperate, clumsy attempt to reassure his father, offered the lives of his own 2 sons as a guarantee. "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you," he vowed. But Jacob would not be moved. The loss of Joseph had shattered him, and Benjamin was the last fragile piece of his beloved Rachel. "My son will not go down there with you," he declared with finality. "His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." The famine, however, was a more relentless master than a father's grief. The grain they had brought was eventually consumed, and the hunger returned. Jacob knew they had to return to Egypt. He told his sons to go back and buy a little more food. It was Judah who stepped forward now, his voice steady and his offer more practical and compelling than Reuben's rash vow. The man warned us solemnly, "You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you," Judah reminded his father. He offered himself as a personal guarantee for Benjamin's safety. "I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." He argued that if they had not delayed, they could have already made the journey twice. Wearily, defeated by the unyielding reality of famine, Jacob relented. He told them to take gifts for the vizier, double the amount of silver to return the first payment and pay for the new grain, and most painfully to take Benjamin. "And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man," he prayed, "so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." It was the sound of a heart breaking for a second time, surrendering to a fate it could no longer control. Section 21. The Feast and the Final Test. The brothers' return to Egypt was a somber procession, shadowed by their father's grief and their own gnawing anxiety. When they arrived and presented themselves before the vizier, Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them. His heart swelled with a painful joy. He instructed his house steward, a man privy to at least some of his master's secrets, to bring the men to his own personal residence and to prepare a feast, for they would dine with him at noon. The brothers, terrified, believed this was the prelude to their downfall because of the silver returned in their sacks. They approached the steward at the entrance of the house, their words tumbling out in a nervous rush. "Please, sir," they said, "we came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night we opened our sacks and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. So we have brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks." The steward, following his master's unseen script, replied with a surprising calm. "It's all right," he said. "Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." Then he brought Simeon out to them, whole and unharmed. The brothers were led into the house, their fear momentarily assuaged by this unexpected kindness. When Joseph arrived home, they presented him with the gifts from Canaan and bowed down before him to the ground, again fulfilling the dream of his youth. His first question was for his father. "Is your father well, the old man you told me about? Is he still alive?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion he struggled to conceal. "Yes, your servant our father is still alive and well," they replied, bowing again. Then Joseph looked at Benjamin, his own mother's son. "God be gracious to you, my son," he said, and was so overwhelmed he had to hurry out of the room to weep in private. He regained his composure, washed his face, and returned, giving the order to serve the meal. The Egyptians, who considered eating with Hebrews an abomination, ate at a separate table, so the brothers were seated by themselves. To their astonishment, they were seated in order of their age, from the firstborn to the youngest. They looked at each other in amazement, a superstitious dread returning. Portions from Joseph's own table were sent to them, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than anyone else's. They feasted and drank freely with him, the tension easing in the warmth of the wine and the vizier's inexplicable favor. Yet, it was all a prelude. Joseph was setting the stage for the final, most brutal test of their character. Had they changed? Would they sacrifice Benjamin as they had once sacrificed him? Section 22. The Silver Cup and the Confrontation. The morning after the feast, the brothers, their spirits lifted and their donkeys loaded with grain, began their journey back to Canaan. They had Simeon, they had Benjamin, and the vizier had been strangely generous. They believed the ordeal was over. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph gave the order to his steward. "Go after those men at once," he commanded, "and when you catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.'" The steward rode out and overtook them, delivering the accusation exactly as instructed. The brothers were stunned and horrified. "Why does my lord say such things?" they protested, their confidence shattered. "Far be it from your servants to do anything like that," We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found in the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my lord's slaves." They were so sure of their innocence that they pronounced a death sentence upon the thief. The steward, still following the plan, replied, "Very well then, let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame." The sacks were quickly unloaded, and the steward began his search, starting with the oldest and finishing with the youngest. The tension was unbearable, as each sack revealed only grain. A flicker of hope grew. Then he reached Benjamin's sack. He reached in, and his hand closed around the silver cup. He drew it out, holding it up for all to see. The brothers tore their clothes in a gesture of ultimate grief and despair. They reloaded their donkeys and returned to the city, a funeral procession for their own futures. Judah led them, his mind racing, the weight of his guarantee to his father crushing him. They threw themselves on the ground before Joseph, who was waiting for them. "What is this you have done?" Joseph demanded, his tone icy. "Did you not know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" Judah, as the spokesman, stepped forward. "What can we say to my lord?" he began, his voice heavy with a defeat that went deeper than this single accusation. "How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup." But Joseph, pressing the test to its absolute limit, refused this collective punishment. "Far be it from me to do such a thing," he said. "Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you, go back to your father in peace." The trap was sprung. Would they abandon Benjamin as they had once abandoned him? Section 23, Judah's plea, the unmaking of a brother. Judah did not turn away. He came closer, close enough to see the intensity in the vizier's eyes, and he began to speak. His voice was not that of a defeated man, but of a broken one, filled with a raw, desperate love for his father. "Please, my lord," he begged, "let your servant speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." He then recounted their entire history with this powerful official, from the first meeting to the demand for Benjamin. He spoke of their father, the old man who had already lost one son of Rachel and for whom the second son was his very life. He described Jacob's reluctance, his own solemn pledge, and the old man's heartbreaking words, "If I am bereaved, I am bereaved." Then Judah laid bare the consequences of failure. "So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow." He had offered himself as a guarantee, and now he made the ultimate offer. "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father." This was the moment of transformation. The brother who had once coldly proposed selling Joseph for 20 shekels of silver was now offering his own freedom, his own life, to spare his father pain and to save his younger brother. The conspiracy was finally, completely undone. The selfishness that had defined them was replaced by a self-sacrificing love. Judah, in his profound and eloquent plea, had proven that they were no longer the men who had thrown their brother into a pit. They had been remade by regret and grief. Joseph could no longer maintain his disguise. The test was over and they had passed. Section 24, the revelation, "I am Joseph." Judah's plea shattered the last of Joseph's defenses. He could not bear to have anyone else present for what was to come. "Have everyone leave my presence," he commanded, his voice cracking with an emotion so powerful it could no longer be contained. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. The room was empty but for the 11 men from Canaan and the Egyptian vizier. And then he wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians outside heard it, and the news reached Pharaoh's palace. The brothers stood frozen, terrified and confused by this raw display from the man they believed held their lives in his hands. Through his sobs, Joseph found his voice, speaking to them in their own Hebrew tongue, the language of their childhood, the language of their home. "I am Joseph," he said, the words exploding into the silence. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers were too terrified to answer him. They could not speak. They stared at this godlike figure, this Zaphanath-Paneah, and tried to reconcile him with the 17-year-old boy they had sold into slavery. The cognitive dissonance was too great. All they felt was a pure, animal fear. They recoiled from him, their minds reeling. Seeing their terror, Joseph softened his tone. "Come close to me," he urged them gently. When they had hesitantly drawn nearer, he said again, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." He did not say it as an accusation, but as a simple, staggering fact. "And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here," he continued, his words flowing with a grace that was not of this world. "Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." He explained the divine perspective on their evil act. "For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." He was reframing their entire history. "So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." He was absolving them of a guilt they had carried for over 2 decades. "He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt." The revelation was complete. The dreams had been true, but the path to their fulfillment was one only a sovereign God could have orchestrated. The brothers listened, their fear slowly giving way to a dawning, awestruck realization. The one they had wronged was not their judge, but their savior. Section 25. The Reconciliation and the Invitation Home. The atmosphere in the room transformed from one of terror to one of stunned, tearful wonder. Joseph, having revealed himself, now moved to enact a full and practical reconciliation. "Now hurry back to my father," he instructed them, his voice filled with urgent love. "Say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay.'" He laid out the plan for their salvation. "You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute." He then gave them proof, tangible evidence to show their disbelieving father. "You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you." He embraced Benjamin, his full brother, and they wept together. Then he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, washing away 22 years of separation, betrayal, and grief with his tears. After this, his brothers found the courage to talk with him. The news reached Pharaoh, who, grateful to Joseph, endorsed the plan and even provided wagons for the journey, as Joseph had instructed. He gave them provisions for the road and new garments for all. To Benjamin, he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of new clothes. To his father, he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. As he sent them off, his final words were, "Don't quarrel on the way." It was a gentle, knowing admonition, understanding the guilt and recriminations that might surface on the long journey home. They went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in Canaan. "Joseph is still alive," they announced. "He is ruler over all Egypt." Jacob was stunned. His heart grew faint, for he did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob was revived. "I'm convinced," Israel said, "my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The family was being drawn back together, not by human effort, but by the mysterious, redemptive hand of God, who had used the evil of brothers to save a nation and preserve the line of the promise. The dreamer had become the deliverer. Section 26. The return to Canaan and Jacob's renewed spirit. The brothers' journey back to Canaan was utterly transformed from their previous haunted trek. where fear and a looming sense of divine retribution had been their constant companions. This time, their hearts were impossibly light, their steps quickened by a joy so profound and shocking it felt like a waking dream from which they dared not awaken. The donkeys, heavily laden with Egyptian grain, and the rich, lavish gifts from Joseph himself, seemed to sense the seismic shift in their master's spirits, moving with a newfound vigor that matched the hopeful energy surrounding them. The sturdy wagons, provided by Pharaoh's own command, rumbled steadily northward, their very presence a tangible, rolling promise of a future they had never dared to envision. True to Joseph's gentle but knowing admonition, they did not quarrel on the way. There were no recriminations, no assigning blame for the long-ago sin that had set this entire chain of events in motion. The overwhelming, disarming reality of Joseph's tearful forgiveness and the miraculous, divine orchestration of their reunion had united them in a way that shared hardship never could. They spoke in hushed, awestruck tones around the campfires, endlessly replaying the moment of revelation. The commanding Egyptian vizier ordering everyone from the room, the shocking, tear-choked words, "I am Joseph," spoken in their own native tongue, the sound of his uncontrollable weeping, and the feel of his embrace that washed away 22 years of separation and secret guilt. The heavy, corrosive guilt they had carried for over 2 decades was not just eased. It was utterly washed away, not by any merit of their own, but by a grace so extravagant they could never have earned it. When they finally arrived at their father's tents in Hebron, their faces were alight with a strange, uncontainable excitement that immediately drew Jacob's weary, grief-lined attention. "Father!" they cried out, rushing to him, no longer able to contain the glorious news. "Joseph is still alive. He is not dead. He is the ruler over all of Egypt." The words struck Jacob like a physical blow to his chest. He staggered back, his face draining of all color, his old heart faltering as it struggled to process the impossible declaration. He stared at them, his mind reeling, convinced this was a cruel, final joke, a trick played either by his own grief-stricken mind or his son's desperate attempt to offer some fleeting comfort. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse and brittle with decades of sorrow. "You mock an old man. My Joseph was torn to pieces by a ferocious animal. I have mourned him every single day since." But they persisted, their words tumbling over one another in a passionate, chaotic chorus, each brother adding a detail to the incredible tapestry of truth. "It is true. We have seen him with our own eyes. He spoke to us. He is the Lord of all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself." To prove their unbelievable story, they showed him the physical evidence. The fine Egyptian wagons, the bolts of luxurious linen, the bags of silver, and the lavish gifts specifically sent for him and for Benjamin. They recounted Joseph's every word, his message of unwavering love, his divine interpretation of their suffering as part of a grander plan, his urgent and heartfelt invitation. As Jacob looked upon the evidence, the solid, undeniable proof of Pharaoh's own royal provision, the icy fortress of despair he had built around his heart began to crack and shatter. The spirit of the old man, which had been crushed and dormant for so long, began to stir with a vibrant, resurrected life. A light returned to his eyes, a light that had been extinguished the day the bloodied, torn robe was presented to him. "Enough," Jacob said, his voice gaining a strength and conviction it had not possessed in over 20 years. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." It was a statement of pure, resurrected faith. The journey south was no longer a desperate, grim quest for mere food. It was a sacred pilgrimage to reclaim a son lost and a joy stolen, a journey toward a restoration that defied all human understanding. Section 27. The Journey to Egypt and the Divine Reassurance at Beersheba. The decision was made, and with it, the entire household of Jacob erupted into a flurry of purposeful, joyful activity. This was not a temporary trip to buy grain. This was a permanent relocation, a moving of their entire legacy and future. They gathered all their possessions, their substantial flocks of sheep and goats, their herds of cattle, all the wealth and artifacts they had accumulated in Canaan over many hard-fought decades. The sturdy Egyptian wagons were loaded with their most precious belongings and their young, wide-eyed children, who sensed the monumental shift in their world. The air, once perpetually heavy with the silence of a profound and shared grief, was now filled with the vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful sounds of preparation and hope. The incessant bleating of sheep being corralled, the lowing of cattle being counted, the excited, high-pitched shouts of children, and the determined, coordinated voices of men and women working together toward a common, glorious purpose. Jacob, now consciously referred to by his God-given name Israel, stood at the center of this great exodus from the land of promise, his own heart a tumultuous sea of conflicting emotions. A soaring, almost painful joy at the imminent prospect of holding his son Joseph again warred with a deep-seated, pragmatic anxiety about leading his large, pastoral family into the powerful, sophisticated, and deeply foreign empire of Egypt. But more than that, a profound, theological fear gripped him. He was the heir of the covenant, the bearer of the singular promise given to his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac, a promise intrinsically and irrevocably linked to this very land of Canaan. Was this voluntary descent into Egypt a betrayal of that divine promise? Was he, in his personal desire to see his son, leading his family into spiritual assimilation and grave danger within the polytheistic, idol-saturated culture of Egypt? These weighty, paralyzing concerns pressed upon his soul with increasing intensity as the great caravan traveled steadily southward. He deliberately directed their course not straight toward the Egyptian border, but to Beersheba, a place deeply sacred, saturated with the memories of his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham, who had both built altars there and received powerful, defining visions from God. It was a place of divine encounter, of covenant renewal, and Israel knew he needed to hear from his God before taking another step. There, at Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac, the familiar scent of the burning offering a plea for guidance and a declaration of his continued faith. And in the deep, silent watches of the night, when fears are loudest, God spoke to Israel in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob," he called, the voice both intimate and immense. "Here I am," Israel replied, his soul straining to listen, his entire being poised for a word that would either grant permission or command him to stay. "I am God, the God of your father," the voice said, its tone both profoundly comforting and utterly commanding, leaving no room for doubt. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there." The reassurance was immediate and specific, directly addressing Israel's deepest fear. God was not confined to the geographical boundaries of Canaan. His promise would travel with them. The nation would be forged in the crucible of Egypt. "I will go down to Egypt with you," God continued, promising his personal, accompanying presence in the heart of the foreign land. "And I will surely bring you back again." This was the anchor for the future. The sojourn was temporary, the return was guaranteed. And then, a final, deeply personal promise that spoke to a father's heart. "And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." This assured Israel that he would not die in a strange land, alone and separated from his beloved son a second time. He would die in peace with Joseph, the son he thought was dead, tenderly performing the final act of a loving son. The reassurance was complete, sovereign, and deeply personal. With this divine sanction, the fear left Israel. The journey could continue, not as a flight into the unknown, but as a guided step in the unfolding story of God's faithful promise. Section 28. The arrival in Goshen and the long-awaited reunion. The divine reassurance at Beersheba transformed the remainder of the journey from a trek of anxiety into a procession of purpose. Israel's spirit, once weighed down by doubt, now soared with a confident hope that propelled the entire caravan forward. The landscape gradually shifted from the familiar, rugged hills of Canaan to the flat, fertile expanse of the Nile Delta, a land of startling green and vast, organized irrigation canals that spoke of a civilization of immense power and order. As they crossed into the territory of Egypt, the sheer scale of the kingdom became overwhelming. The caravan, so large and significant in Canaan, now felt small and conspicuous amidst the bustling traffic on the well-maintained roads leading to the capital. True to Joseph's meticulous planning, he had sent clear instructions ahead, and they were met by guides who directed them not to the overwhelming capital itself, but to the region of Goshen, a fertile pastureland perfect for their flocks and herds, situated on the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. It was a place where they could remain somewhat separate, a distinct community within the great empire, thus preserving their unique identity. The moment they were settled in their new temporary home, Joseph, unable to wait a moment longer, prepared his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. The anticipation that had built over weeks of travel, over 22 years of separation, over a lifetime of grief and miraculous hope, now reached its crescendo. As Joseph's royal chariot, flanked by his guards, approached the Israelite camp, the news spread like wildfire. Jacob, his old heart pounding with a rhythm it had forgotten, stood and watched the cloud of dust approach. Then Joseph saw him. The father he had left as a vigorous man in his prime was now stooped and white-haired, his face a roadmap of the sorrow he had endured. But his eyes held the same love Joseph remembered. Joseph leaped from his chariot before it had fully stopped, his regal composure completely abandoned. He rushed to his father and fell upon him, wrapping his arms around the frail, trembling frame, and he wept. He wept long and loud, the tears of a boy who had been lost and was now found, the tears of a man releasing a burden of loneliness and pain he had carried for more than half his life. He clung to his father, and Israel clung to him, his own tears soaking into the fine linen of his son's vizierial robes. The sobs that racked them both were a language beyond words, a sacred dialogue of loss and restoration. After a long while, when the storm of emotion had subsided to quiet, shuddering breaths, Israel found his voice, weak but clear. He held Joseph's face in his hands, his gnarled fingers tracing the features of the man his boy had become. "Now I am ready to die," Israel whispered, his eyes shining with a peace that surpassed all understanding. "Since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." It was the statement of a completed life, a fulfilled promise. The long night was over. The dreamer was home, not in the land of his birth, but in the heart of his father, and the long, tortuous path that had led them here was, in this moment of embrace, revealed to have been a path of grace all along. Section 29. Presentation to Pharaoh and settlement in Goshen. After the initial, overwhelming joy of the reunion had settled into a steady, warm glow, Joseph turned his mind to the necessary political and practical steps to secure his family's future. He could not have the family of the vizier living as unofficial refugees. Their status needed to be formalized before Pharaoh himself. He selected 5 of his brothers, likely the most presentable and articulate, and brought them before the king of Egypt. He coached them on what to say, ensuring their request would be seen as a logical and humble petition from dutiful herdsmen, not a presumptuous demand from the family of a powerful official. When they stood before the God-king, Pharaoh, true to his gratitude toward Joseph, asked them the expected question, "What is your occupation?" They answered exactly as Joseph had instructed. "Your servants are shepherds, just as our fathers were. We have come to live here a while, because the famine is severe in Canaan and there is no pasture for your servants' flocks. So now, please let your servants settle in Goshen." The request was perfect. It was specific, reasonable, and placed them in a region suitable for their trade and somewhat isolated from the main Egyptian population, who generally despised shepherds. Pharaoh, his regard for Joseph evident in his generous tone, did not merely grant their request. He expanded upon it. He looked directly at Joseph and said, "Your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen." He was giving them the prime pastoral land in the kingdom. And then, displaying a further level of trust and favor, he made an extraordinary offer. "And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock." He was offering positions of responsibility within the royal economy to these foreign newcomers. Following this royal audience, Joseph brought his father, Jacob, in to meet Pharaoh. It was a meeting of 2 patriarchs, one of a family, the other of a nation. The old shepherd from Canaan stood before the incarnate God of Egypt. Pharaoh, with a surprising deference, asked the aged Jacob, "How old are you?" Jacob's reply was not a boast of longevity, but a weary reflection on the hardship that had marked his life, a stark contrast to the divine Pharaoh's existence. "The years of my pilgrimage are 130, he said. "My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." He blessed Pharaoh and then withdrew. The covenant-bearer pronounced a blessing upon the world's most powerful king. Joseph then formally settled his father and his brothers in Egypt, giving them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And he provided food for his father and his brothers and all his father's household, according to the number of their dependents. They were safe, they were provided for, they were legitimized. The family was not just reunited. They were established under the direct protection of the Egyptian crown, a safe harbor in the midst of a global famine, their future secured by the son they had once cast out. Section 30. Joseph's administration during the famine. With his family securely settled in the fertile region of Goshen, Joseph could now turn his full attention back to his monumental task as the administrator of Egypt's survival. The famine, as he had foretold, was severe and unrelenting, gripping not only Egypt but the entire known world. The 7 years of unparalleled abundance were a distant, almost mythical memory, and the reality of the 7 lean years was a daily, grinding struggle for survival. Joseph, however, had prepared for this exact moment. The granaries he had built in every city were not just full. They were vast fortresses of life, bulging with the surplus of the years of plenty. As the famine tightened its grip and the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, the king's response was always the same, a testament to his absolute trust in his vizier. "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." And so, the entire population of Egypt, and eventually a vast influx of desperate people from surrounding nations, became dependent on the system Joseph had created. He did not give the grain away, he sold it. This was a critical part of his wise administration. Initially, the people used their silver to buy grain, and Joseph collected all the money and brought it into Pharaoh's palace. The royal treasury swelled to unprecedented levels as the wealth of the nation and the surrounding lands was systematically centralized. The following year, the people returned, but their money was gone. "Give us bread," they pleaded. "Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is all gone." Joseph's solution was both pragmatic and transformative. "Bring your livestock," he said. "I will sell you food in exchange for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their horses, their sheep and goats, their cattle, and their donkeys. That year, he supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock. And all their livestock that year became the property of Pharaoh. The state's control over the nation's assets grew exponentially. The next year came, and the people returned to him. "We cannot hide from our Lord the fact that since our money is gone and our livestock belongs to you, there is nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before your eyes, we and our land as well? Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we with our land will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." This was the culmination of Joseph's economic strategy. In exchange for seed to plant, the people sold their land and themselves into a form of serfdom to Pharaoh. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. The entire population, with the exception of the priests who received a regular allotment from Pharaoh, became tenants on land that now belonged to the crown. He moved the people into the cities, creating a more centralized and manageable population for the distribution of seed and food. Then, with the land firmly under state control, he gave them seed and said, "Sow the land, but when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for the fields and as food for yourselves and your households and your children." The people, grateful to be alive and to have a clear, sustainable future, agreed. "You have saved our lives," they said. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." Thus, Joseph established a law that remains to this day. A fifth of the produce goes to Pharaoh. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Through this brilliant, if severe, economic policy, Joseph not only saved the population from starvation but also radically consolidated power for the Egyptian monarchy, creating a feudal system that would define the nation for generations. He had managed the crisis with a wisdom that was both salvific and politically astute, ensuring the stability and power of the kingdom that had become his family's refuge.